Tonight, you'll discover how the brave Maccabee warriors who saved Judaism accidentally created the monster who would try to murder baby Jesus. You'll never believe how one moment of compromise, one decision to force conversion upon ancient enemies, cursed the Jewish nation for generations. How Hanukkah's heroes unknowingly put Esau's descendants on David's throne. So settle in, because this tale will change everything you thought you knew about history's most twisted irony. Take a deep breath, let your shoulders drop, and allow yourself to sink into complete comfort. Tonight, we journey back through time together, exploring the shadows where ancient prophecies collide with political ambition. If you enjoy these peaceful historical journeys, please subscribe and let this gentle voice guide you into restful sleep. Close your eyes, relax completely, and let this ancient story wash over you like a whispered prayer. Chapter 1. Dusk over Idumea. Picture the ancient land of Edom, bathed in the golden amber light of evening. Rolling hills stretch endlessly toward the horizon, where purple shadows gather like memories of forgotten kings. This is Idumea, land of Esau, where the desert winds carry whispers of old resentments. Here, beneath these twilight skies, a decision was made that would echo through centuries, changing the course of Jewish history forever. The year was 129 BCE, and John Hyrcanus stood at the borders of this ancient territory. Son of Simon Maccabees, heir to the heroic legacy of Hanukkah's champions, he gazed upon the Idumean settlements with calculating eyes. The Maccabees had freed Jerusalem from Greek oppression, but their work was far from finished. Enemies surrounded the newly independent Jewish state, and Hyrcanus believed conquest was the only path to lasting security. The Idumeans were not strangers to the Jews. They were family, descended from Esau, brother of Jacob. They shared the same patriarch, Abraham. Yet centuries of separation had bred suspicion and hostility. These were the people who had rejoiced when Jerusalem fell, who had blocked Jewish refugees from fleeing Babylonian conquest. Now, as Hyrcanus assembled his armies, ancient grudges would finally be settled through the sword. The conquest began swiftly. Hyrcanus's well-trained forces, sweeping across Idumean strongholds like desert wind, city after city fell, their walls crumbling before the disciplined Jewish army. The Idumeans, unprepared for such organized assault, found themselves overwhelmed. Within months, their ancient homeland lay under complete Jewish control, their leaders dead or fled, their people trembling before their new master's judgment. Then came the ultimatum that would reshape history. Hyrcanus gathered the conquered Idumean population, men, women, and children, in great assemblies across their former territory. His message was stark and uncompromising: convert to Judaism completely, accept circumcision, embrace every law and custom, or face exile from the only land they had ever known. This was unprecedented, the first recorded forced conversion in Jewish history. The Torah itself forbade such coercion, teaching that genuine faith could never be compelled by sword or threat. Yet political necessity had trumped religious law, and the descendants of the Maccabees found themselves violating the very principles their fathers had died defending. The irony was profound. Those who had fought for religious freedom were now denying it to others, becoming the very oppressors they had once resisted. Faced with losing everything, most Idumeans submitted to the conversion. In painful ceremonies conducted throughout their homeland, Idumean men underwent circumcision, families adopted Jewish dietary laws, children learned Hebrew prayers. But these were not conversions of the heart. They were transactions of survival, performed under duress, wrapped in resentment that would fester like an untreated wound through generations to come. The newly converted Idumeans became known as the inside outsiders, technically Jewish by law, yet forever marked as converts by birth. They occupied a strange liminal space in Jewish society. They could participate in temple rituals, but were viewed with suspicion. They could marry into Jewish families, yet their loyalty was constantly questioned. This forced identity created a deep psychological wound, a simmering anger that would prove catastrophic. Pure suaja, pure tijwive, the tavalagi of Bill, in news foreign came, that you faked. Among these reluctant converts, certain families began plotting their revenge. They would use their new Jewish status not to embrace their conqueror's faith, but to infiltrate and eventually dominate it. The most ambitious among them was the family of Antipater, whose descendants would manipulate Jewish politics with ruthless cunning, turning their forced conversion into a weapon of political ascension that would ultimately threaten the very foundation of Jewish messianic hope. The biblical prophecy of eternal enmity between Jacob and Esau was playing out in new and twisted ways. Where once the conflict had been between separate nations, now it raged within the same religious community. Convert against native, Edomite against Israelite, all wearing the same ceremonial fringes, all claiming the same God, yet harboring ancient hatreds that conversion ceremonies could never heal. As twilight deepened over the conquered territories, Hyrcanus surveyed his expanded kingdom with satisfaction. He had secured Jewish borders, eliminated potential enemies, and added thousands of new citizens to his realm. Yet, in the growing darkness, he could not see the seeds of destruction he had planted, the generational curse that would rise from these forced conversions to threaten everything his ancestors had died protecting. The Idumean converts returned to their homes, their bodies bearing the marks of Jewish covenant, their hearts burning with unextinguished rage. They would teach their children to remember, to bide their time, to wait for the moment when Esau's descendants could finally triumph over Jacob's legacy. That moment would come sooner than anyone imagined, through the rise of one family whose ambition would shake the very foundations of Jewish faith. In the distance, storm clouds gathered over Jerusalem, as if the sky itself sensed the approaching catastrophe. The Maccabees had won their war against foreign oppression, only to become oppressors themselves. They had preserved Jewish independence, only to plant the seeds of its greatest internal threat. The forced conversions of Idumea were complete, but the consequences were just beginning to unfold across the landscape of history. And so, as night falls over ancient Idumea, we witness the moment when heroism transformed into hubris, when religious purity became political expedience, when the victorious descendants of Judah Maccabee sowed the very seeds that would one day threaten the Messiah they awaited. The first chapter of our story ends here, but the curse of forced conversion has only just begun to weave its dark magic through Jewish destiny. Chapter 2: Bitter Cloak of Conversion. In the shadows of ancient conquest, something sacred was about to be shattered. Picture this: solemn ceremonies unfolding under reluctant skies, where conversion wasn't choice but command. The Torah itself whispers warnings against forced faith, yet here we witness history's first recorded violation of that very principle. Men and women stood before altars, not in joy, but in bitter compliance, their hearts heavy with resentment, their souls wrapped in unwanted robes of belief. The ancient texts are clear: conversion must come from the heart, not from the sword. Deuteronomy speaks of welcoming the stranger who chooses to join, but never of forcing faith upon the unwilling. Yet in those twilight hours, as John Hyrcanus's armies pressed southward, sacred law would bend to political ambition. The Idumeans, descendants of Esau himself, would soon face an impossible choice: convert or face exile from their ancestral lands, their freedom sacrificed on the altar of conquest. Imagine the weight of that moment when messengers arrived in Idumean villages bearing ultimatums wrapped in religious language: accept circumcision, embrace Jewish law, abandon the gods of your fathers, or lose everything you've ever known. The irony cuts deep. Those who should have been protectors of Torah principle were about to become its violators. In quiet homes, families gathered to discuss their impossible fate, their whispered conversations heavy with grief for a future they never chose. The Idumeans had wandered these southern hills for generations, their customs woven into the very stones, their prayers rising with desert winds. They were descendants of Esau, Jacob's twin brother, carrying ancient memories in their blood. Now, strangers demanded they forget their heritage, abandon rituals passed down through countless generations, and embrace beliefs that felt foreign on their tongues. The conversion ceremonies began, but hearts remained unchanged, wrapped in invisible cloaks of bitterness and quiet rebellion. Picture those solemn gatherings where conversion became performance, where sacred rites were reduced to political theater. Families lined up, not in celebration, but in submission. The ritual baths, the ceremonial words, the cutting of flesh, all performed under watchful eyes, ensuring compliance, but never sincerity. These were not joyful embraces of faith, but bitter swallowing of survival. The Idumeans emerged from those waters, technically Jewish, but spiritually orphaned, carrying resentment like stones in their hearts, forever changed, yet forever apart. The Torah had warned against this very thing. Leviticus and Deuteronomy both speak of protecting the vulnerable, of welcoming converts who come willingly, never of forcing faith through threats. Yet here, religious law bent to military might, sacred principle sacrificed for territorial expansion. The rabbis would later struggle with this precedent, wrestling with questions that had no clean answers. How could forced conversion be valid when the heart remained unchanged, when compliance masked contempt, when fear replaced faith as the foundation of belief? Now, these reluctant converts found themselves in an impossible position inside the camp, but never truly of it. They attended synagogues, where whispers followed their footsteps, participated in festivals that tasted like ash in their mouths, raised children who inherited both faith and resentment in equal measure. Their Jewish neighbors viewed them with suspicion, questioning their sincerity, doubting their devotion. The Idumeans had gained citizenship, but lost their souls, trapped between two worlds, belonging fully to neither, carrying invisible scars from that forced transformation. In their homes, away from prying eyes, some Idumeans maintained secret connections to their old ways. They taught their children stories of Esau, whispered memories of abandoned gods, kept alive traditions that officially no longer existed. This double life became their survival strategy, public compliance masking private defiance. They learned to speak the right words, perform the right rituals, while nursing grievances that grew deeper with each passing generation. Bitterness became their inheritance, passed down like precious heirlooms from parent to child. The ancient enmity between Jacob and Esau, brothers who fought even in the womb, now took on new dimensions. The descendants of Jacob had conquered the descendants of Esau, but victory carried a price. Instead of enemies kept at a distance, they now harbored enemies within, converts who bore the right credentials but wrong hearts. The biblical prophecy that these brothers would struggle, that the elder would serve the younger, was being fulfilled in ways no one had anticipated, creating fractures that would echo through centuries. Some Idumeans, however, saw opportunity in their forced conversion. If they must wear this new identity, perhaps they could use it to gain power, to climb ladders previously closed to them. They studied Jewish law with calculating minds, mastered religious practice with political purpose, built networks within their new communities. Their conversion, though originally unwelcome, became a tool for advancement. They would prove more Jewish than the Jews themselves, if that's what it took to succeed, their bitterness transforming into ambition, their resentment channeled into ruthless determination. Among these ambitious converts, one family would rise above all others. The name Antipater would soon echo through palaces, a man who understood that forced conversion, rather than being a weakness, could become his greatest strength. He studied the contradictions of his position, the way Jewish law had been violated to create him, and learned to navigate between worlds. His Idumean heritage, rather than being hidden, became a tool for understanding power, for recognizing that rules, even sacred ones, could be bent by those clever enough to find the leverage points. The conversion ceremonies had ended, but their consequences were just beginning. These reluctant Jews would carry their resentment like a slow-burning flame, passing it down through generations, nursing grievances that would eventually reshape the very kingdom that had created them. The Maccabees thought they were expanding their territory, securing their borders, creating unity through uniformity. Instead, they had planted seeds of future discord, invited their enemies inside the gates, and violated the very Torah they claimed to protect, all in pursuit of political security that would prove illusory. In quiet moments, away from the public performance of faith, Idumean mothers told their children stories of what was lost. They spoke of gods who understood desert winds, of rituals that honored ancient stones, of a time when their identity wasn't borrowed, but born. These whispered histories became acts of resistance, ways to preserve something authentic in a world of enforced pretense. The children listened, absorbing both official faith and secret heritage, learning to live with divided hearts, carrying the weight of ancestors who had been forced to choose between belief and belonging. The irony was profound. Those who claimed to follow God's law had broken it in pursuit of earthly power. They had created a precedent that would haunt them, a violation of sacred principle that would eventually return to destroy them. The forced converts they had made would become their rulers. The resentment they had sown would bloom into revenge. The compromise they had accepted would corrupt everything they held dear. In trying to expand their kingdom, they had planted the seeds of its eventual destruction, proving that political expedience, no matter how seemingly justified, always carries a price. As generations passed, the Idumeans learned to wear their imposed faith like armor, using it to shield their true intentions, to access circles of power previously closed to them. They became masters of religious language, experts in legal interpretation, students of every weakness in the system that had created them. Their forced conversion, initially a symbol of defeat, slowly transformed into a weapon of patience. They would wait, they would learn, they would rise, until the descendants of those who had forced faith upon them would kneel before Idumean kings, rulers who owed their thrones to that long-ago compromise with sacred law. The bitter cloak of conversion had been woven thread by reluctant thread, in those ancient ceremonies of compliance. What began as political expediency, a simple solution to a territorial problem, had become something far more dangerous. The Idumeans were now inside the camp, technically Jewish, but spiritually distinct, carrying the DNA of ancient enmity in their hearts, waiting for their moment to rise. The stage was set, the players positioned for a drama that would eventually reach all the way to a stable in Bethlehem, where the consequences of forced conversion would threaten the life of a promised child. Chapter 3: Scriptures and Shadows. Tonight we trace ancient bloodlines through time, following the shadow of a feud that began in Rebekah's womb. Two brothers, Jacob and Esau, their rivalry echoing across centuries like whispers in sacred halls. In the gentle glow of genealogical scrolls, we'll discover how their ancient enmity shaped the very foundations of Jewish destiny and gave rise to a figure who would change history forever. Picture the patriarch Isaac blessing his sons with trembling hands. Jacob receives the birthright through cunning, while Esau weeps bitter tears of loss. But this moment, this pivotal exchange, sends ripples through time itself. The blessing Isaac spoke over Esau becomes a haunting prophecy, one that will echo through generations. By your sword you shall live, and you shall serve your brother. Yet when you grow restless, you will break his yoke from your neck. Esau becomes the father of Edom, settling in the rugged mountains southeast of the Dead Sea. His descendants, the Edomites, would remember their ancestors' loss across the centuries. They watched from their mountain strongholds as Jacob's children, the Israelites, received the promised land. Generation after generation, the wound festered. The ancient rivalry between brothers became a national grudge passed down like a dark inheritance through bloodline after bloodline. The scriptures themselves bear witness to this enduring enmity. The prophet Obadiah speaks harsh words against Edom, condemning their violence against their brother Jacob. Malachi echoes the divine sentiment. I have loved Jacob, but Esau I have hated. These aren't merely personal preferences, but acknowledgments of a cosmic conflict. Two nations struggle within one womb. The elder shall serve the younger, and so the ancient pattern continues, weaving through the tapestries of time. Fast forward through centuries of conflict, through David's conquests and Solomon's glory, through divided kingdoms and Babylonian exile. The Jewish people return to rebuild Jerusalem, and eventually the Maccabees rise to defend their faith. John Hyrcanus, that zealous Hasmonean prince, extends Jewish territory southward. His armies march toward Idumea, the land of Edom, where Esau's descendants still dwell. The ancient prophecy begins to stir. Yokes are about to shift, and history will never be the same. In the quiet of ancient archives, genealogical scrolls tell their story in glowing lamplight. Scribes trace bloodlines with careful precision, marking the descent from Esau through generations of Edomite kings. These records, seemingly mundane, hold secrets that will shake the foundations of Jewish sovereignty. For within these genealogies lies the seed of future catastrophe, the lineage that will produce a man who uses his forced conversion as a stepping stone to unimaginable power. The shadows grow longer as we approach the moment of collision when Hyrcanus's army stands before the Edomite cities. This isn't merely a military conquest, it's the fulfillment of ancient prophecy. Jacob's descendants, now wielding Roman-backed power, face Esau's children in their mountain strongholds. The irony runs deep, for the Maccabees fought to preserve Jewish faith from forced Hellenization, Yet now they prepare to impose Jewish law upon others. The wheel of history turns, bringing unexpected reversals. Hyrcanus delivers his ultimatum with the cold authority of conquest: convert to Judaism, or face exile from your ancestral lands. The Edomites, children of Esau, must choose between their heritage and their homes. Most choose conversion, submitting to circumcision and Jewish law. But this isn't the heartfelt embrace of Abraham's covenant. It's compliance born of desperation. They become Jews in law, but remain Edomites in heart, carrying their ancestors' resentment like a hidden flame, waiting for the moment to break free. Among these forced converts, a family emerges that will change the course of history. The genealogical scrolls glow softly as we trace the bloodline through generations of Edomite nobility down to a man named Antipas. His son, Antipater, will master the art of survival in a world that views him as perpetually foreign. These Idumeans, as they're now called, learn to navigate the dangerous waters between their enforced Jewish identity and their Edomite hearts, developing skills that will prove devastatingly effective. Antipater the Idumean emerges from the shadows of history, a figure of remarkable cunning and ambition, born into the liminal space between cultures. He understands power in ways that purebred aristocrats cannot fathom. His forced convert status, rather than limiting him, becomes his greatest asset. He can speak to Jewish concerns while maintaining connections to Edomite networks, positioning himself as an indispensable bridge between communities. The ancient rivalry takes on new dimensions, played out through political maneuvering and careful alliances. Watch as Antipater navigates the turbulent waters of Hasmonean politics, always present but never quite trusted, always useful but never quite accepted. He serves various Jewish princes with calculated loyalty, demonstrating his value while carefully avoiding the fate of those who grow too powerful too quickly. His Edomite heritage, once a burden, becomes a source of unique perspective. He sees the weaknesses in Jewish politics that insiders cannot perceive, and he begins to position himself accordingly, patient as a serpent waiting in the garden. The genealogical scrolls shimmer in the lamplight, revealing the intricate web of marriages and alliances that Antipater weaves. He secures a wife from a prominent Nabatean family, further expanding his network beyond Jewish circles. His children will inherit not just Edomite resentment and Jewish law, but also Arabian connections and Roman ambitions. The shadows lengthen as we see how one man's strategic thinking begins to gather the threads that will eventually strangle the very dynasty that forced his ancestors to convert. Rome's shadow falls across the Jewish world, and Antipater recognizes the changing tides of power. While Hasmonean princes squabble among themselves, he cultivates relationships with Roman commanders. His outsider status, his multilingual capabilities, his understanding of diverse customs, all become assets in dealing with Rome's representatives. The ancient prophecy stirs. The yoke begins to shift as the descendant of Esau positions himself to serve the new masters of the world, and through that service, to rule over the children of Jacob. In the quiet moments before the storm, we sense the anticipation building. Antipater has spent decades learning, watching, calculating. His forced convert status, once a mark of subjugation, has become his secret weapon. He understands both Jewish law and Edomite grievance, both Roman ambition and local resistance. The shadows gather around him as he prepares to make his move, to leverage everything he has learned into power that will reshape the Jewish world and threaten the very foundations of messianic hope. The scrolls whisper of ancient grudges and modern opportunities, of forced conversions and voluntary ambitions. Antipater stands at the crossroads of history, carrying within his bloodline the accumulated resentment of centuries, yet possessed of the skills and connections to transcend his origins. The silence grows heavy with possibility, pregnant with the promise of dramatic reversals. Soon, very soon, the descendant of Esau will begin his ascent to power, using the very system that oppressed his people to elevate himself above them. And so we pause here, in this moment of anticipatory silence, as Antipater the Idumean prepares to step from the shadows into the light of history. The ancient feud between Jacob and Esau has found new expression. The genealogical threads have been woven into position. The stage is set for a drama that will shake the Jewish world to its foundations. Sleep now, and let the weight of these ancient rivalries settle into your dreams, for tomorrow the Edomite rises. Chapter 4. Between Crown and Curse. From the shadows of his father's ambition emerges a figure destined to reshape Judea forever, King Herod the Great. Yet greatness, as history whispers, often masks the deepest contradictions. Here stands a man whose very bloodline condemns him in the eyes of those he seeks to rule, an Edomite ascending to David's throne, a crown that burns the head it adorns. Tonight we trace the tangled web of his rise to power and the terrible price of his legitimacy. Antipater's son inherited more than political acumen. He inherited a curse written in blood and ethnicity. The Jews watched with growing unease as this descendant of Esau claimed dominion over Jacob's promised land. Every stone of Jerusalem seemed to whisper the ancient prophecy, "The elder shall serve the younger," yet here stood the elder's child upon the younger's throne. The irony was not lost on those who remembered their scriptures, and their resentment would prove as enduring as stone. Through Rome's favor and his father's careful maneuvering, Herod claimed what no Edomite had ever possessed, the kingship of Judea. The year was 37 BCE, and the appointment sent shockwaves through the Jewish community. Here was their ancient enemy's descendant, wearing the crown that tradition reserved for David's line. The very foundations of their identity seemed to tremble, for how could God's chosen people be ruled by one whose ancestors they'd been commanded to remember as eternal foes? Yet Herod possessed a cunning that transcended bloodlines. Understanding the precarious nature of his position, he embarked upon a campaign of legitimization that would define his entire reign. Marriage became his first weapon, uniting himself with the Hasmonean princess Mariamne, hoping her pure Jewish blood might wash away the stain of his Edomite heritage. But blood once spilled cannot be reclaimed, and the Jewish people's memory ran deeper than any political alliance could reach or heal. The new king's paranoia took root in the fertile soil of his illegitimate claim. Every whisper in the marketplace became a potential conspiracy, every gathering of elders a threat to his throne. He saw rebellion in the smallest acts of religious devotion, treason in the mere mention of ancient prophecies. The weight of his false crown pressed down upon his mind, transforming a cunning politician into something far more dangerous, a ruler whose very existence depended upon the elimination of all legitimate alternatives. To placate his subjects and perhaps convince himself of his righteousness, Herod embarked upon the most ambitious building project in Jewish history, the reconstruction of Solomon's temple. With imported marble and gold, he created a structure that outshone even the original in its magnificence. Yet every gleaming stone seemed to mock his efforts, for what did architectural grandeur matter when the builder himself was viewed as an abomination? The temple's beauty could not beautify the soul of its benefactor. Still the whispers persisted in Jerusalem's narrow streets. The people spoke in hushed tones of the true heirs, the Hasmonean descendants who carried the blood of the Maccabees in their veins. These were the rightful rulers, they murmured, not this Edomite usurper who had stolen David's throne through Roman favoritism. Herod heard every whisper, felt every glance of disdain, and slowly, methodically, began to plan the elimination of every potential rival who might one day claim his stolen crown. The Hasmonean family represented everything Herod could never become: legitimate Jewish royalty with an unbroken connection to their people's liberation. Their very existence was a living rebuke to his rule, a constant reminder that the throne he occupied belonged to others. In his twisted mind, their elimination became not just political necessity, but existential requirement. He could not truly be king while the rightful heirs drew breath. Their blood was the final barrier between him and acceptance. One by one, the Hasmonean nobles began to disappear. Some died in suspicious accidents, others fell victim to sudden illnesses that baffled the court physicians. Herod's hand was invisible, but unmistakable to those who understood the pattern. The king was systematically erasing the bloodline that reminded everyone of his illegitimacy, writing his own legitimacy in the blood of those who possessed what he could never earn, the people's genuine love and respect as their natural-born rulers. Even his beloved wife Miriam could not escape the web of suspicion that Herod's paranoia had woven around the royal household. Her Hasmonean blood, once his path to legitimacy, now marked her as a potential threat. Perhaps she would bear a son who might one day claim his rightful heritage. Perhaps she harbored loyalty to her murdered relatives. Perhaps she simply reminded him too powerfully of what he could never be, a true child of Israel, beloved by God and people alike. The palace became a house of shadows, where trust died and suspicion flourished like poisonous flowers. Servants whispered of the king's midnight wanderings, his conversations with phantoms who accused him of crimes both committed and contemplated. The crown that had once seemed the ultimate prize now felt like a burning circlet of iron, searing his brow with the heat of his own guilt and the constant fear of divine retribution for his usurpation. When Mariamne's execution finally came, it sent shock waves through the kingdom that reverberated far beyond the palace walls. The king had murdered his own wife, a Hasmonean princess, the very woman whose blood he had hoped would legitimize his reign. And now that same blood stained his hands and marked him forever as kinslayer and oathbreaker. The people's hatred crystallized into something harder than diamond and infinitely more enduring than his precarious hold on power. With each Hasmonean death, Herod's isolation deepened. He had eliminated his rivals, but in doing so had also eliminated any possibility of genuine acceptance by his subjects. The throne room that should have been the center of his triumph became the epicenter of his solitude, a place where the king sat alone with his conscience and the ghosts of his victims. Every ceremony of state became a hollow mockery, every public appearance a reminder of the chasm between ruler and ruled. The massacre of the Hasmonean family stands as testament to the corrupting power of illegitimate authority. What began as political calculation evolved into genocidal obsession, the systematic destruction of an entire noble house to satisfy one man's paranoid need for security. Yet security built upon such foundations proves as unstable as sand, for blood cries out from the ground, and the murdered dead leave behind them legacies that no crown can suppress or authority diminish. As the chapter closes, we see Herod seated upon his blood-purchased throne, technically supreme, yet spiritually bankrupt, feared by all, yet loved by none. The crown he had schemed so long to possess had become his golden prison, the very symbol of his success, now the instrument of his damnation. Around him lay the corpses of those whose only crime was possessing the legitimacy he could never claim. Yet their blood would prove the seed of his ultimate downfall. The Edomite king had achieved his ambition through massacre and manipulation, but in gaining the whole world of political power, he had lost something far more precious: his soul, his peace, and ultimately his security. For somewhere in the distance, beyond his paranoid gaze, new heirs were being born, new challengers to his stolen throne were drawing their first breath, and the ancient prophecies he had tried so desperately to silence were stirring once again in the hearts of the faithful. Chapter 5. Maccabean Sunset. In the quiet, creeping twilight of history, we witness a tragedy unfolding in the corridors of power. The Hasmonean dynasty, once the proud liberators of Israel, now faces its darkest hour. Herod the Great, king by Roman appointment, turns his paranoid gaze toward his own family. The very bloodline that freed the temple from Greek hands will soon face extinction from within. Tonight, we court tragedy together. The palace halls echo with whispered conspiracies, real and imagined. Herod's Idumean blood courses through veins that can never truly belong to Israel. Each Hasmonean face reminds him of his foreign origins. Each noble lineage highlights his manufactured legitimacy. Paranoia becomes his closest advisor, whispering poison into royal ears. The king who rules through Roman favor fears those who ruled through Jewish blood. Maine, beloved wife and Hasmonean princess, becomes the first casualty of Herod's fears. Her royal blood, once his path to legitimacy, now threatens his throne with every breath. The woman he loved more than his own soul becomes suspect in his twisted mind. Love and power, two forces that cannot coexist in a heart consumed by suspicion and dread. The execution chamber claims its royal victim. Mariamne walks to her death with the dignity of her ancestors, the same courage that once faced Antiochus. Herod's hands shake as he signs the death warrant, yet his signature flows across parchment like poison ink. The Hasmonean sunset begins with the fall of its most beautiful star, extinguished by the very man who claimed to cherish her. Brothers follow their sister into death's embrace. Aristobulus and Alexander, sons of Mariamne, bear the fatal flaw of Hasmonean blood. Herod sees conspirators in every shadow, traitors behind every whispered conversation. The palace becomes a tomb where love dies and trust withers. Each family gathering becomes a funeral, each feast a wake for the living, soon to be dead. The aging king's madness deepens with each passing season. Sleep brings no peace to the man who destroys his own flesh. Dreams fill with accusing eyes, with voices calling from shallow graves. Herod builds monuments to distract from his murders, constructs temples while constructing tombs. The kingdom prospers while the royal family perishes, progress purchased with the currency of innocent blood. Ancient Rome watches with calculating eyes as Herod devours his own dynasty. Augustus himself remarks that it is better to be Herod's pig than his son, for pigs at least are protected by Jewish law. The emperor's dark humor masks genuine concern, for unstable kings make unreliable vassals. Yet Herod's efficiency in eliminating threats impresses even Roman sensibilities, bloody but effective. The Hasmonean name fades like twilight shadows across Jerusalem's stones. Each generation grows thinner, each branch of the family tree withers under royal axe. Herod's children, by Mariamne, inherit their mother's beauty and their grandfather's royal bearing, traits that seal their fate. The dynasty that liberated the temple cannot survive the king who claims to honor it. Whispers in the marketplace speak of divine judgment, of curses falling upon the house of David's usurper. The people remember the Maccabees, remember when Jewish kings fought for Jewish freedom. Now a foreign king sits on David's throne, wearing a crown purchased with Hebrew blood. The sunset approaches, and with it, the end of an era, the closing of a chapter. Yet even as Herod destroys the Hasmonean bloodline, guilt gnaws at his conscience like a cancer. The king who can command armies cannot command his own tormented soul. Sleep becomes a battlefield where the dead demand answers, where murdered wives and children call for justice. No amount of wine can drown the voices. No amount of power can silence the accusations. In desperation, Herod turns to stone and mortar for salvation. If he cannot be loved, perhaps he can be remembered. Grand projects emerge from guilty conscience, architectural wonders rising from blood-soaked foundations. The king seeks to build his way into Jewish hearts, to construct acceptance with limestone and gold. But monuments cannot resurrect the murdered, cannot undo the done. The Temple Mount becomes Herod's masterpiece, his desperate attempt at redemption through reconstruction. Ancient stones give way to magnificent new walls, soaring higher than Solomon ever dreamed. Jewish workers labor under Idumean supervision, building beauty for the God of their ancestors under direction of their ancestors' destroyer. Irony shapes every stone, contradiction guides every measurement laid upon the sacred ground. Golden eagles spread their wings across temple courts, Roman symbols gleaming beside Jewish stars. Herod's renovation blends the sacred with the political, the holy with the expedient. Priests perform ancient rituals within walls built by foreign hands, offering sacrifices in a sanctuary reconstructed by their people's oppressor. Beauty and blasphemy intertwine like twisted vines growing upon consecrated soil. The greatest irony unfolds in marble and gold, an Idumean king erecting Judaism's most famous symbol. The descendant of Esau builds a house for the God of Jacob. The son of forced converts creates a temple for willing believers. Herod's temple rises magnificent and contradictory, beautiful yet tainted, glorious yet stained with the blood of those it was meant to honor and appease forever. Pilgrims arrive from distant lands to witness the architectural marvel, unaware of the ghosts that haunt its construction. The temple gleams like a jewel in Jerusalem's crown, reflecting sunlight off walls built with conscience money. Yet beneath the beauty lies a foundation of betrayal. Under the gold rests the guilt of a king who murdered his way to hollow redemption. As our chapter closes, twilight deepens over Jerusalem's holy hill. The Maccabean sunset fades into darkness, taking with it the dreams of an independent Jewish kingdom. Herod's temple stands as testimony to power's corruption, beauty born from brutality, magnificence arising from murder. The Idumean king has built his monument, but at what cost to his soul and to history itself? Chapter 6: Silent Stones and Resentful Echoes. The morning sun kisses Jerusalem's newest wonder, Herod's temple rising like a dream, made marble and gold. Yet beneath this breathtaking beauty, something darker stirs. The very hands that lay these sacred stones tremble with bitterness, and for the king who commands this holy work is the same man they whisper about in shadowed corners. How strange that their most magnificent sanctuary should spring from such poisoned soil. Picture the Temple Mount, transformed beyond recognition. Where once stood Solomon's modest sanctuary, now rises a structure that dwarfs even Rome's greatest monuments. White limestone gleams like fresh snow, while gold leaf catches every ray of sunlight and throws it back in brilliant cascades. The outer courts stretch endlessly, porticos supported by columns so massive that 20 men linking arms couldn't embrace their circumference. It is architectural poetry, written in stone and precious metal. Craftsmen from across the Mediterranean labor here, their hammers ringing out in constant rhythm. Master stonemasons from Syria shape blocks so perfectly fitted that no mortar fills the joints. Phoenician metalworkers beat gold into paper-thin sheets, covering every surface that might catch the eye. The smell of cedar from Lebanon mingles with incense, while precious stones from distant lands arrive daily by caravan. This is not mere construction, it is transformation into something approaching the divine. The inner sanctuary gleams with unimaginable splendor. Here stands the Holy of Holies, draped in curtains woven from the finest purple and scarlet threads. Golden cherubim spread protective wings over the sacred space, their faces turned inward toward mysteries too holy for mortal eyes. Every surface tells stories in precious metal and stone, tales of covenant and promise, stretching back through generations. It is beauty that makes the soul weep, architecture that whispers of eternity. Yet walk among the workers, and you'll hear whispers that chill the heart. They build with skilled hands but bitter spirits, for their king remains an outsider despite his crown. How can an Idumean, descended from forced converts, truly understand the sacred mysteries he houses in marble and gold? Their hammers strike stone with quiet fury, each blow carrying decades of resentment. They create beauty, but beauty born from wounded pride and ancestral shame. The priests accept Herod's lavish gifts, but their smiles never reach their eyes. They know the genealogies by heart, can trace every pure bloodline back to Abraham and beyond. Yet here stands their temple, built by money earned through collaboration with Rome, funded by a man whose grandfather was circumcised at sword point. The irony tastes bitter on their tongues, this magnificent sanctuary rising from such compromised foundations. In the temple courts, pilgrims from distant lands gasp at the splendor before them. They see only glory, golden walls that seem to capture heaven itself and hold it close to earth. But the local merchants and money changers, they see something else entirely. They see their oppressor attempting to buy legitimacy with limestone and precious metals, trying to purchase with gold what blood and birth should provide. Their resentment runs deeper than temple foundations. And what of Herod himself, walking these sacred halls in royal purple? Does he find the peace he seeks among these soaring columns and golden surfaces? Perhaps, in quiet moments, he believes his grand gesture might finally win their hearts. Perhaps he dreams that architectural magnificence can overcome genetic shame, that beauty might triumph over bloodline. But deep inside, he knows the truth that haunts every Idumean convert. The king inspects his masterpiece with critical eyes, noting every imperfection that must be corrected. Yet even as he commands adjustments to cornerstones and decorative friezes, he cannot adjust the fundamental flaw that undermines everything. He builds their temple, but he can never build their trust. He houses their God in splendor, but he cannot house himself in their acceptance. The most beautiful prison remains a prison. Night falls over Jerusalem, and in the half-built temple, shadows dance between scaffolding and stone. Here in this place where sacred meets political, where divine dreams meet human ambition, something toxic begins to take root. The king's generosity breeds suspicion rather than gratitude. His magnificence creates distance rather than closeness. In trying to buy love with limestone, he only purchases deeper resentment. Sleep doesn't come easily to kings who rule by Rome's permission, especially kings with Idumean blood coursing through their veins. Herod lies awake in his palace, listening to Jerusalem's nighttime whispers, carried on desert winds, even surrounded by luxury, protected by guards and walls. He feels exposed and vulnerable. The temple he builds by day becomes in dreams a monument to his own inadequacy. Strange reports reach the king's ears, carried by merchants and travelers from distant lands. They speak of prophecies and promised deliverers, of ancient words that speak of kingdoms rising and falling. In Bethlehem, wise men ask questions about newborn kings. In the temple courts, old men speak of consolation coming to Israel. These whispers gather like storm clouds, dark with implication and heavy with threat to established order. The king's paranoia begins to crystallize around a single terrifying thought. What if the God he houses so magnificently decides to choose another king? What if divine favor flows towards someone with purer blood, cleaner lineage, unmarked by the shame of forced conversion? The temple stones seem to whisper accusations. The golden walls reflect not glory, but judgment. Every shadow might hide a rival. Every prophecy might herald his downfall. In the temple's growing magnificence, Herod sees not triumph, but threat. Every perfect stone accuses him of imperfection. Every golden surface reflects his genetic inadequacy. The very beauty he creates becomes a mirror showing all his flaws, all his outsider status, all his desperate need for acceptance that architecture cannot provide. Beauty becomes torment, magnificence transforms into madness, and from such soil, terrible decisions begin to sprout. The temple nears completion, its spires reaching toward heaven like prayers made stone. But in the king's heart, darker prayers are taking shape. If God will not accept him, perhaps God's potential replacements can be eliminated. If prophecies threaten his throne, perhaps the prophesied can be silenced before they speak. The same mind that conceived architectural beauty now conceives architectural horror. And so our tale turns toward its darkest chapter, where temple stones and infant graves become strangely connected, where the king's desperate need for legitimacy births unthinkable violence, where beauty and brutality spring from the same poisoned well. The silent stones of Herod's temple will soon echo with very different sounds, sounds that will stain his legacy forever in innocent blood. Chapter 7, Bethlehem's Nightfall. The small city of David sleeps beneath a canopy of stars that seem to pulse with an otherworldly tension, their light casting long shadows across narrow streets where children dream peacefully in their beds. But these are not ordinary stars tonight. They whisper of ancient prophecies stirring to life, of words spoken centuries ago by prophets who saw this very moment, this convergence of divine promise and human terror. The air itself holds its breath, waiting. In the royal palace miles away, Herod the Great paces his chambers like a caged beast, his mind churning with the weight of prophecies he cannot escape. The scribe's words echo in his memory, how the Messiah must be born in Bethlehem, the city of his ancestor David. Every shadow seems to mock him. Every whisper carries the threat of his throne crumbling beneath the feet of a promised king. His Idumean blood, his forced conversion heritage, suddenly feel like chains binding him to inevitable doom. The prophecies themselves seem to have taken on a life of their own, weaving through the streets of Bethlehem like invisible threads connecting past to present. Micah's ancient words resonate through time. But you, Bethlehem, though you are small among the clans of Judah, out of you will come for me one who will be ruler over Israel. These sacred syllables drift through the night air, settling like dew on rooftops where innocent families sleep, unaware that their children have become pawns in a cosmic game. Herod's paranoia has transformed from political calculation into something far more primal, a terror that gnaws at his very soul. He built the temple to magnificent heights, trying to prove his devotion to the Jewish people. Yet their whispered conversations always return to bloodlines and legitimacy. Now these same people speak of another king, one whose lineage stretches back through David himself, making Herod's forced Idumean heritage feel like a curse that brands him as forever an outsider, as forever illegitimate. The children of Bethlehem sleep soundly tonight, their small chests rising and falling with the innocent rhythm of dreams. Toddlers clutch worn blankets, babies nestle against their mother's warmth. Older children sprawl across simple beds with the careless abandon of those who know nothing of royal fear or prophetic dread. Their parents gaze upon them with the timeless love that has blessed families since the world began, never imagining that tomorrow might steal away these precious lives, never suspecting the storm gathering in a king's tortured mind. The irony of this moment would be laughable if it weren't so tragically profound. John Hyrcanus, the Maccabean hero who forced the Idumeans to convert, thought he was securing Israel's future by expanding its borders and its people, yet his decision to violate the Torah's own principles about forced conversion has led directly to this moment where an Idumean king now contemplates the murder of Jewish children to preserve his crown. The curse of that ancient compromise ripples through generations, each wave bringing new sorrow. In the genealogical scrolls that scribes guard so carefully, the line from Abraham to David gleams with divine purpose, each name a stepping stone toward the promised Messiah. But alongside these sacred lineages runs another thread, darker and more twisted, from Esau through Edom to Idumea, from forced conversion to royal power. Tonight, these two bloodlines converge like opposing armies, one carrying hope, the other wielding fear, both destined to clash in ways that will echo through eternity, reshaping the very meaning of faith and power. Herod's magnificent temple stands gleaming in the moonlight, its walls reflecting the very stars that now seem to prophesy his downfall. Every stone was placed to prove his devotion, every golden ornament designed to win the people's love. Yet he remains forever the outsider king, the Idumean who wears David's crown but can never claim David's heart. The temple's beauty mocks him now, a monument to his desperate attempt to belong to a people whose Messiah will render his reign meaningless, whose promised king will expose his illegitimacy. The night air carries whispers of ancient enmity, the hatred between Jacob and Esau that began in Rebekah's womb and now plays out on history's grandest stage. Jacob's descendants sleep peacefully in Bethlehem, trusting in divine promises, while Esau's descendant paces in royal chambers, plotting their destruction. The brothers' struggle for birthright and blessing has become a clash between the kingdom of heaven and the kingdoms of earth, between prophetic hope and paranoid fear. between the gentle cry of a newborn and the desperate rage of a threatened king. Bethlehem's mothers rock their children to sleep with lullabies passed down through generations, the same melodies that once soothed David himself when he was but a shepherd boy in these very hills. Their voices carry the weight of centuries, the hopes and dreams of countless mothers who believed in God's promises, who trusted that their children might be part of something greater. Tonight, these lullabies take on an almost prophetic quality, as if the mothers somehow sense that their babies need extra comfort, extra protection, extra love. The forced conversion that brought Herod's ancestors into the Jewish faith was meant to strengthen Israel, to turn enemies into allies through the power of the law. But conversion without conviction breeds resentment, and resentment nurtured across generations becomes a poison that corrupts everything it touches. Herod's Judaism is political theater, his devotion mere calculation, his crown a symbol of how far ambition can carry those willing to abandon their true nature. Tonight that poison reaches its most concentrated form, threatening innocent lives to preserve a hollow throne. The stars above Bethlehem seem to pulse with an ancient rhythm, the heartbeat of prophecy itself, marking time until the moment when heaven and earth collide in the most unlikely of places. These same stars once guided Abraham on his journey of faith, shone down upon David as he composed his psalms, witnessed the rise and fall of kings and kingdoms. Now they bear silent witness to the approaching fulfillment of every promise, every covenant, every whispered hope that has sustained God's people through centuries of waiting, centuries of believing, centuries of trusting. Herod's soldiers rest in their barracks tonight, unaware that tomorrow they may be asked to do the unthinkable, to turn their swords against the most innocent of victims. These men have served faithfully, protected the kingdom, maintained the peace that Herod's rule has brought to the region. Yet loyalty to an earthly king may soon demand actions that violate every principle of honor, every instinct of protection, every natural law that guards the vulnerable. The curse of forced conversion spreads like a plague, corrupting even those who serve in ignorance. In the quiet homes of Bethlehem, fathers kiss their children good night with the gentle tenderness that has blessed families since creation began. Their calloused hands, worn from honest labor, stroke soft hair and whisper prayers of protection over innocent dreams. These men know nothing of royal paranoia or prophetic fulfillment. They know only the simple truth that their children are precious beyond measure, worth any sacrifice, deserving of every protection. Their love stands as a stark contrast to the cold calculation brewing in distant palace chambers. The biblical pattern repeats itself with tragic precision. Pharaoh's fear of Hebrew multiplication leading to infanticide, Herod's terror of messianic prophecy driving him toward the same unholy solution. Power always fears the powerless when divine promises are involved. Earthly kingdoms always tremble when heavenly kingdoms draw near. The children of Bethlehem become unwitting symbols of this eternal conflict, their innocent lives caught between prophecy and politics, between God's plan and man's panic, between love's gentle whisper and fear's violent scream. As this night deepens toward dawn, as the stars wheel overhead in their ancient dance, as prophecy and paranoia converge on this small city of David, the stage is set for one of history's most heartbreaking moments. The Maccabees' compromise with Jewish law has ripened into its bitter fruit. Forced conversion has produced its most toxic harvest, and innocent children will pay the price for their ancestors' political calculations. The gentle night holds its breath, knowing that tomorrow will bring tears that will echo through eternity, sorrow that will reshape the meaning of sacrifice itself. Chapter 8, Mourning the Innocents. In the shadowed halls of his Jerusalem palace, King Herod paced through sleepless nights, haunted by the Magi's words about a newborn king. The Idumean ruler, descendant of forced converts, felt his carefully constructed throne trembling beneath prophecies he could neither understand nor ignore. Fear consumed him, a toxic blend of paranoia and desperation that would soon spill innocent blood across Bethlehem's quiet streets. The irony cut deep through history's fabric. Here was Herod, whose very presence on David's throne resulted from his ancestors' forced conversion under the Maccabees, now preparing to destroy the promised Messiah of the very people who had conquered his forefathers. The curse of that ancient compromise echoed through generations, bringing this moment of ultimate confrontation between Esau's descendant and Jacob's prophesied deliverer. Destiny's threads tightened around a sleeping town. Herod summoned his most trusted commanders in the dead of night, their torches casting dancing shadows on marble walls. His voice trembled, not with age, but with the weight of his terrible decision. Kill all male children under 2 years in Bethlehem and its surrounding regions, he whispered. Leave no stone unturned, no house unsearched. The king who beautified the temple now prepared to desecrate the cradle of messianic hope. The soldiers received their orders with grim silence, understanding the horror they were commanded to unleash. These were not foreign enemies, but Hebrew children, sleeping peacefully in their mother's arms. Yet Herod's paranoia had become their law, his fear their mandate. As dawn approached, they gathered their weapons and hardened their hearts, preparing to march toward Bethlehem, where innocent dreams would soon become nightmares of unimaginable loss. In Bethlehem, mothers sang gentle lullabies to their babies, unaware that death marched toward their threshold. The little town that had welcomed David's birth now cradled other precious sons, each one carrying his parents' hopes and dreams. The same streets where shepherds had recently heard angelic proclamations would soon echo with screams of grief. Herod's soldiers approached like wolves in the night, bringing darkness to the city of light. The massacre began at sunrise, systematic and merciless. Door after door burst open as soldiers tore sleeping infants from their mother's arms. The biblical prophecy of Rachel weeping for her children began its terrible fulfillment, her inconsolable grief echoing through generations from Jacob's time to this moment of unspeakable loss. Bethlehem's streets ran red with innocent blood as Herod's paranoia demanded its price in the most precious currency imaginable. Yet, even in this darkness, divine providence worked its mysterious ways. The Christ child had already fled to Egypt, carried by Joseph and Mary, who obeyed the angel's urgent warning. Herod's sword struck empty air, where his true target had rested. The Idumean king's most calculated act of brutality missed its mark entirely, leaving only broken families and shattered innocence in its wake, while the Messiah lived safely beyond his reach. The theological irony deepened with each fallen child. Herod, whose ancestors had been forcibly converted to avoid exile, now wielded that same violent power against the covenant people. The Maccabees' compromise with Torah law had planted seeds that bloomed into this bitter harvest. Forced conversion had placed Esau's descendant on David's throne, and now Edom sought to destroy Israel's ultimate hope through the massacre of her most vulnerable children. News of the slaughter spread through Judea like wildfire, carrying with it waves of shock and revulsion. Even Herod's supporters struggled to justify this unprecedented act of barbarity. The king who had beautified their temple with golden splendor now revealed himself as capable of the most horrific cruelty. His paranoid fear had transformed him into the very monster the people had long suspected lurked beneath his carefully cultivated royal facade. In the aftermath, Bethlehem became a town of mourning women, their keening cries rising to heaven like incense of grief. Fathers returned from fields to find their homes transformed into tombs of shattered dreams. The community that had celebrated the Messiah's birth now buried its sons, each small grave a testament to one man's consuming fear of losing power. Their tears watered the same soil where angels had announced great joy. Herod returned to his palace believing he had secured his throne, yet sleep eluded him more than ever. The faces of slaughtered innocents haunted his dreams, and no amount of wine or luxury could wash away the stain of their blood from his conscience. His Idumean heritage, marked by forced conversion and perpetual outsider status, had finally culminated in this act that forever separated him from the people he claimed to rule. The curse that began with John Hyrcanus's forced conversions now reached its darkest expression. Those resentful Idumean converts, never truly accepted despite their circumcision and outward compliance, had produced a king who would massacre Jewish children to protect his stolen crown. The ancient enmity between Jacob and Esau played out in blood and tears, proving that forced faith breeds only bitterness and violence across generations of consequence. Yet divine justice moved with patient certainty through these tragic events. Herod's paranoid calculation had failed completely. The Christ child lived and thrived in Egyptian exile, while the tyrant king's own health began its final decline. Disease crept through his body as surely as guilt consumed his mind, preparing to claim the life of one who had claimed so many others without mercy or remorse. History would remember this massacre as one of its darkest chapters, a reminder of power's capacity for unspeakable evil when driven by fear and unchecked ambition. The innocent blood spilled in Bethlehem became a crimson thread in the tapestry of messianic fulfillment, showing how even humanity's worst acts cannot thwart divine purpose. Rachel's children had not died in vain. Their sacrifice unknowingly protected the ultimate sacrifice yet to come. The surviving families of Bethlehem would carry their grief for generations, passing down stories of that terrible dawn when Herod's soldiers came. Yet alongside their sorrow ran whispered tales of the child who escaped, the baby whose birth had prompted such desperate violence. In their darkest hour, hope lived on in the knowledge that somewhere beyond Herod's reach, the promised Messiah grew safely toward his destiny. And so the chain of consequences that began with forced conversion reached its most tragic link, proving that compromise with divine law creates wounds that fester across centuries, and when likewise Paul to fester that even to fester across centuries. The Maccabees' decision to violate Torah's prohibition against forced conversion had placed a wolf among the sheep, and now those sheep lay slaughtered while their shepherd lived in exile, preparing for the day when he would return to heal all wounds. Chapter 9, Echoes of Esau. In the shadowed corridors of time, an ancient rivalry stirs like dust upon forgotten scrolls. The hostility between twin brothers Jacob and Esau, a wound that never healed, a grudge that transcended generations. Tonight we trace the bloodline of hatred from Esau's bitter tears to Herod's trembling throne. The echoes of resentment, born centuries before Christ's birth, now reverberate through the cold chambers of a king's restless heart. Long ago, in the tent of Isaac, two brothers wrestled for blessing. Jacob, the supplanter, grasped his brother's heel at birth and never let go. Esau, the hunter, came home weary and hungry, trading his birthright for a bowl of red stew. But it was the stolen blessing that cut deepest when Jacob disguised himself with goat skins, deceiving his blind father, stealing what belonged to his older brother. Esau's cry echoed through the ages, "Bless me too, my father." But Isaac's trembling hands had already bestowed the covenant blessing upon Jacob. All that remained for Esau was a prophecy of struggle. "By your sword you shall live, and serve your brother." The words hung heavy in the air like incense, sealing a fate that would ripple through countless generations, brother against brother, nation against nation. From this wounded moment, Esau became Edom, dwelling in the mountains of Seir, his descendants spreading across the rocky highlands south of the Dead Sea. Red earth, red stew, red hair. Everything about Esau spoke of blood and earth and ancient anger. While Jacob's children became Israel, Esau's sons became the Edomites, forever looking north toward their brother's prosperity, forever remembering the blessing that was stolen. The scriptures remember this enmity, Obadiah prophesying against Edom, "For the violence against your brother Jacob, shame shall cover you, and you shall be cut off forever." The prophet's words carried forward through time like whispers in the wind, this ancient hostility becoming the backdrop for every encounter between the twin nations, Jacob's children and Esau's descendants, locked in eternal opposition. Centuries rolled by like stones down Edom's mountainsides, and still the hostility endured. When Israel wandered in the wilderness, seeking passage through Edom's territory, the descendants of Esau barred their way. "You shall not pass through," they declared, drawing swords against their own relatives. Moses led Israel around Edom's borders, but the wound between brothers remained, festering in the desert heat. King David conquered Edom, placing garrisons throughout their land, yet the resentment only deepened. Solomon's wealth was built partly on Edomite copper and trade routes, yet still they plotted rebellion. Every generation brought fresh conflicts, Edomites raiding Israel's southern borders, Israelites retaliating with military campaigns, the ancient curse of Isaac playing out again and again, brother lifting sword against brother, as prophesied so long ago. Then came John Hyrcanus, the Hasmonean prince, who would change everything. In his zeal to expand Jewish territory, he turned his armies southward toward Edom, conquering the land of Esau's descendants with fire and sword. But Hyrcanus did something unprecedented, something that violated the very heart of Jewish law. He offered the Edomites a choice that wasn't really a choice at all: convert to Judaism or face exile from your ancestral homeland. The Torah itself forbade forced conversion, yet here was a Jewish prince demanding exactly that. Circumcision and Jewish law, or loss of everything their fathers had built. The Edomites faced an impossible decision: abandon their land or abandon their identity. Most chose conversion, but their hearts remained unchanged, bitter converts who would never truly belong. Inside the camp, but never of it, these forced converts carried their resentment like hidden daggers. They observed Jewish rituals while nursing Edomite grievances. They spoke Hebrew while thinking in the language of ancient revenge. Among them rose Antipater, an ambitious man who understood that his outsider status could become his greatest weapon if he played the game cleverly enough. Antipater, the Idumean descendant of Esau, through forced conversion, began his rise through the chaos of civil war. While pure-blooded Jews fought among themselves, He positioned himself as peacemaker and advisor. His foreign blood became an advantage, trusted by Romans who saw him as unthreatening yet knowledgeable enough about Jewish affairs to serve as their agent in this turbulent province. From Antipater came Herod, his son, who would surpass even his father's ambition. The Romans made Herod king of Judea, placing an Edomite on David's throne, the ultimate fulfillment of ancient animosity. Esau's descendant ruling over Jacob's children, the stolen blessing reversed by political maneuvering and Roman swords. Yet Herod's crown sat heavy on his head, for he knew his subjects would never accept him. Paranoia consumed Herod like slow poison, the echoes of Esau's resentment, amplifying every whisper of conspiracy. He murdered the Hasmonean heirs, including his own wife from that royal line, silencing the voices that might challenge his legitimacy. Yet still, he beautified the temple, trying to win Jewish hearts while his Edomite heritage made him forever foreign, forever feared, forever fighting the ghosts of his ancestors. Then came the prophecy that chilled his blood, wise men from the east, seeking the newborn King of the Jews. In Bethlehem's streets, they said, a child had been born who would rule Israel. Herod's worst fear materialized, another claimant to David's throne, another reminder that he would always be the outsider king. The ancient hostility between Jacob and Esau found new expression in infanticide. The massacre of Bethlehem's innocents, Herod's final desperate act to preserve his dynasty, echoed with centuries of buried resentment. Esau's tears for the stolen blessing became the tears of mothers for murdered sons. The twin brothers' rivalry reached its darkest expression as the descendant of the rejected twin sought to kill the promised Messiah, the ultimate heir of Jacob's covenant. Yet even in his fury, Herod could not escape the deeper irony. The Maccabees' compromise with Torah, their forced conversions of Edom, had placed an enemy on Israel's throne. The echoes of Esau's ancient resentment had found their voice in royal chambers, proving that some wounds never heal, some hostilities never die, some choices curse nations for generations, yet unborn. Chapter 10, Maccabees' Folly. Sometimes the very things we do to protect what we love become the seeds of our greatest sorrow. The Maccabees had fought so valiantly against forced conversion to Greek ways, yet now they would become the ones wielding that same terrible weapon. In the quiet moments between victory and consequence, we find the most tragic of ironies. How protectors can become oppressors, how the saved can become the destroyers, how good intentions can pave roads to unimaginable darkness. John Hyrcanus stood at the crossroads of destiny, his armies victorious over the ancient kingdom of Idumea. These were the descendants of Esau, brother to Jacob, forever bound by biblical enmity. The land stretched before him, fertile and strategic, but populated by those who worshipped foreign gods. A choice lay before him, one that would echo through centuries. Accept their surrender and let them keep their ways, or demand something far more profound, something that would violate the very Torah he sought to defend. The decree came like thunder across the Idumean hills. Convert to Judaism or face exile from your ancestral lands. Circumcision for every male, adherence to Jewish law for every family, or lose everything your fathers had built. It was the first recorded forced conversion to Judaism in history, and it violated the Torah's own sacred principle that faith must come from the heart, not from the sword. Yet Hyrcanus pressed forward, believing he was protecting his nation, unaware he was planting seeds of future destruction. The Idumeans submitted, but their hearts remained unconquered. They underwent the rituals, they spoke the prayers, they followed the laws, but resentment burned like hidden coals in their souls. They were inside the camp, but never of it, converts in name, but enemies in spirit. The ancient rivalry between Jacob and Esau had taken on new dimensions, no longer a family feud, but a theological wound that would fester for generations, waiting for the perfect moment to strike back at those who had humiliated them. Among these reluctant converts, a family emerged that would master the art of survival through cunning. The house of Antipater learned to navigate between worlds, Jewish in practice, but Idumean in heart, loyal in appearance, but ambitious in reality. They watched, they waited, they learned the weaknesses of their conquerors. Generation after generation, they climbed the ladder of power, using their forced conversion, not as a burden, but as a ladder, each rung bringing them closer to ultimate revenge against the Hasmonean dynasty. Antipater the Idumean became the power behind the throne, a master manipulator who understood that true revenge required patience. He served the Hasmoneans while secretly undermining them. He protected their interests while advancing his own. He smiled at their faces while sharpening knives for their backs. The forced convert had become the puppet master, pulling strings with hands that had been forced to accept circumcision, planning the downfall of those who had forced his ancestors to abandon their gods in the sacred name of survival. Then came Herod, Antipater's son, a man whose very existence was a testament to the unintended consequences of forced conversion. Half Idumean by blood, fully Jewish by law, completely Edomite in his heart's deepest chambers. Rome looked upon him favorably, seeing in this forced convert someone who could rule the Jews without truly being one of them. The irony was exquisite. The descendants of those who had resisted forced conversion would now be ruled by someone whose Judaism was itself the product of forced conversion, a circle completing itself in darkness. Herod the Great ascended to power with Roman backing, and his first act was to systematically destroy the Hasmonean dynasty. The very family that had forced his ancestors into Judaism would now face extinction at his hands. One by one, he eliminated them, including his own Hasmonean wife, Mariamne, consumed by paranoia that her noble Jewish blood made her a threat to his illegitimate throne. The forced convert was now the king, and he would ensure that no true descendant of the Maccabees would ever challenge his blood-stained crown again. Yet Herod's relationship with his forced Judaism created a peculiar torment. He beautified the temple beyond imagination, expanding it into one of the wonders of the ancient world, as if magnificent stones could somehow legitimize his stolen crown. But the more he gave to the temple, the more the people despised him, for they knew what he was, a descendant of Edom sitting on David's throne, a forced convert ruling over the chosen people, an abomination wrapped in purple and gold, ruling through fear rather than love. The biblical enmity between Jacob and Esau had found its perfect expression. Esau's descendant now held dominion over Jacob's children, and paranoia consumed him like a fever. Every shadow held potential rivals. Every prophecy threatened his reign. Every whisper in the marketplace could signal rebellion. When the Magi arrived, seeking the newborn king of the Jews, Herod's worst fears crystallized into murderous action. Another claimant to the throne, another threat to the dynasty built on forced conversion, another reason to spill innocent blood in service of preserving his illegitimate power. The massacre of Bethlehem's innocents revealed the ultimate irony. The descendant of those forced to accept Judaism was now attempting to murder the very Messiah that Judaism had long awaited. baby boys torn from mothers' arms, their blood staining the streets where David had once walked, all because a forced convert feared losing the throne he had no right to occupy. The Maccabees' decision to violate Torah principles in pursuit of political security had led directly to this moment when Edom's heir tried to destroy Judaism's greatest hope. How could the Maccabees have foreseen such consequences? They had fought so bravely against those who would destroy their faith, yet their own compromise with sacred law had installed the faith's greatest enemy on David's throne. The forced conversions they had demanded created not genuine believers, but bitter enemies, enemies who would use their enforced Judaism as a weapon against the Jewish people. Their victory had become their curse, their strength had become their weakness, their protection had become their greatest vulnerability, echoing through the generations like a mournful song. The lesson whispers through history, like wind through ancient ruins, that good intentions cannot justify evil methods, that protecting faith through faithless acts creates spiritual poison that spreads through generations. The Maccabees had meant to strengthen Judaism, but had instead handed their enemies the keys to the kingdom. They had meant to expand God's chosen people, but had instead created false converts whose descendants would nearly destroy the Messiah himself. Sometimes, the greatest threats come not from outside enemies, but from our own compromises with the very principles we seek to defend. In the quiet moments of reflection, we see how one decision can ripple across centuries, how a single compromise can curse generations, how the desire for immediate security can sacrifice eternal principles. The Maccabees' folly was not in their courage, but in their willingness to use their enemies' methods to achieve holy ends. They had become what they had once fought against, oppressors demanding conversion at sword point, forgetting that true faith cannot be forced, that genuine belief must flow from love, not fear, not coercion, not political necessity. And so the wheel of consequence turned, from Antiochus's persecution to Maccabean liberation, from Maccabean victory to Hasmonean compromise, from forced conversion to bitter resentment, from resentment to revenge, from revenge to the near destruction of the very Messiah the Maccabees had died to preserve the hope of meeting. The irony was complete. The protectors had enabled the very destruction they had fought to prevent. The saviors had created the instruments of their people's greatest peril, all because they had forgotten that ends, no matter how noble, cannot justify unholy means. As sleep draws near, let this ancient tragedy remind us that our choices echo far beyond our lifetime, that compromise with sacred principles creates wounds that fester across generations, that the methods we use to protect what we love often determine whether our love survives. The Maccabees' courage saved Judaism from extinction, but their folly nearly destroyed its greatest gift to the world. In their story, we find both inspiration and warning, both light and shadow, both triumph and the terrible price of forgotten principles. Rest well, knowing that every choice matters, and every generation inherits both blessings and curses from those who came before. Chapter 11, The Edomite Throne. Tonight we witness one of history's cruelest ironies, how the throne of David, meant for Jacob's children, came to rest beneath an Edomite king. Here sits Herod, descendant of Esau, occupying the very seat his ancestors were never meant to claim. The ancient rivalry between brothers had found its bitter culmination, and the promised Messiah would face his greatest threat from this twisted genealogy of power. The roots of this tragedy stretch back through generations of resentment to when Hyrcanus forced Esau's descendants to accept circumcision and Jewish law or face exile from their homeland. These Idumeans, these children of Edom, submitted to conversion with hearts full of bitterness. They would wear Jewish identity like an ill-fitting garment, never truly belonging, always remembering what they had lost, always plotting what they might gain. From this poisoned well of forced faith emerged Antipater, the Idumean, a man who understood that his status as a convert could become his greatest weapon. While true-born Jews looked down upon his lineage, he cultivated relationships with Rome, positioning himself as the bridge between Jewish tradition and imperial power. His forced conversion, meant as punishment, became the very foundation of his political ascent. Antipater's son would surpass even his father's ambitions. This was Herod, called the Great by history, though greatness would prove a haunting designation. Born of Idumean blood, raised in Jewish law, educated in Roman politics, he embodied every contradiction of his time. Neither fully Jew nor fully Gentile, he existed in the dangerous space between worlds, where power could be seized but never truly possessed. When Herod claimed the throne of David, the very foundations of covenant trembled. This seat, promised to Judah, established for David's lineage, sanctified for the coming Messiah, now supported the weight of Esau's grandson. The ancient prophecy that the elder shall serve the younger seemed mockingly reversed, as Edom ruled over Jacob's children, and the brotherly rivalry found its cruelest expression in royal purple. The people sensed the wrongness of it all. This Idumean king, this descendant of their ancestral rivals, ruling from Jerusalem's heights while claiming divine appointment. Herod felt their resistance like thorns in his crown, their whispered doubts like daggers in his sleep. He knew they would never truly accept him, and this knowledge would poison every decision, every relationship, every moment of his reign. To compensate for his questionable legitimacy, Herod poured gold and ambition into the temple's renovation, creating architectural wonders that would rival Solomon's original glory. Yet even as he beautified the house of God, the priests whispered prayers for his downfall. His offerings were accepted, but his person remained forever outside the covenant's embrace, forever reminded that forced conversion had created forced loyalty. Paranoia became Herod's closest companion, threading through his thoughts like poison through water. He married into the Hasmonean family, seeking legitimacy through royal blood, then systematically destroyed those same relatives when their popularity threatened his throne. His own wife Mariamne, descendant of the Maccabees, would fall victim to his jealous suspicions, proving that even love could not survive his fearful hunger for security. The massacre of his own family revealed the depth of Herod's isolation. His sons, his wife, his mother-in-law, all sacrificed on the altar of his insecurity. Each death was meant to secure his throne, yet each killing only deepened the chasm between him and his subjects. The Edomite king had become an island of violence, surrounded by the very people he claimed to rule. Then came whispers of prophecy, rumors of a child born to fulfill ancient promises, a true king whose legitimacy would not depend on Roman favor or forced conversions. For Herod, this was the ultimate threat, the possibility that God himself might raise up a rival to his stolen throne. The promised Messiah, heir to David's covenant, would expose every lie Herod had told himself about his right to rule. The wise men's arrival in Jerusalem sent tremors through Herod's carefully constructed world. They sought the King of the Jews, not the king appointed by Caesar, but the one chosen by heaven itself. Their question, "Where is he who has been born King of the Jews?" revealed the temporary nature of all Herod's achievements, the hollow crown that would someday crumble before true royalty. Bethlehem, David's city, became the focal point of Herod's terror. This small town, insignificant by worldly standards, harbored the threat that could unravel his entire reign. The prophecy was clear. From Bethlehem would come a ruler who would shepherd Israel, a king whose authority would flow from covenant rather than conquest, from promise rather than political maneuvering. In his desperation to eliminate this divine rival, Herod ordered the unthinkable, the slaughter of innocents, babies who might grow to threaten his throne. The descendant of Esau would spill the blood of Jacob's children, seeking to murder the Messiah before his ministry could begin. The ancient hatred between brothers had found its most horrific expression in infanticide wrapped in royal decree. Yet, even as Herod's soldiers moved through Bethlehem's streets, the child they sought had already escaped to Egypt, protected by divine warning and parental obedience. The Edomite king's greatest effort to secure his throne had failed, and his brutal attempt to thwart God's plan had only fulfilled another prophecy. Rachel weeping for her children, a mother's grief echoing through the centuries. The bitter irony was complete. The Maccabees' victory over Antiochus, their purification of the temple, their rededication to God's covenant, had ultimately led to this moment. Their decision to force conversion on the Idumeans, violating Torah's own principles, had placed an Edomite on David's throne, who would attempt to murder the very Messiah their festival celebrated in advance. As we drift toward sleep, let us ponder this generational tragedy, how one compromise with divine law, one moment of choosing political expediency over spiritual principle, echoed through the centuries until it nearly silenced the song of salvation. The Edomite throne stands as testimony that forced faith creates only forced loyalty, and that God's promises cannot be thwarted even by those who wear stolen crowns. Chapter 12. Prophetic Whisperings. In the gentle glow of ancient scrolls, we find ourselves at the threshold of revelation. The threads of this tragic tapestry begin to weave together now, showing us how one fateful decision by the Maccabees would echo through generations. The prophecies whispered of it all along, the enmity between brothers, the curse that would follow, forced conversions, leading us inexorably toward that starlit night in Bethlehem when everything nearly came undone. The ancient texts glow softly in the lamplight, revealing patterns that stretch across centuries. Genesis speaks of Jacob and Esau, two brothers locked in eternal conflict, the younger supplanting the elder, receiving the blessing, while Esau's descendants, the Edomites, nursed their resentment in the rocky wilderness. These same scrolls warned that Edom would one day gain dominion, yet who could have foreseen how this prophecy would unfold through forced conversion and political manipulation? Listen closely to the whispers of history. When John Hyrcanus conquered Idumea, he thought he was expanding Jewish territory, strengthening the faith, but the prophecies knew better. They understood that forcing conversion violates the very heart of genuine belief. The Idumeans submitted to circumcision and Jewish law, but their hearts remained unconverted. They became wolves in sheep's clothing, insiders who were never truly inside, nursing ancient grievances while wearing the mask of faith. The prophetic texts illuminate this tragic irony. The Maccabees, who had fought so valiantly against forced Hellenization, now became the ones forcing conversion. They who had resisted Antiochus's attempts to destroy their faith were now destroying the faith of others. The scrolls remind us that God desires willing hearts, not coerced compliance. Yet in their zeal for political expansion, the Hasmoneans forgot this fundamental truth, setting in motion a curse that would haunt their lineage. In the soft candlelight, we trace the genealogical scrolls. Antipater emerges from this forced conversion, an Idumean who learned to navigate Jewish politics with cunning precision. The prophecies whisper of Esau's eventual dominion, and here we see it beginning to manifest. Antipater uses his convert status as both shield and sword, claiming Jewish identity when convenient, yet never forgetting his Edomite heritage. He becomes the bridge between worlds, the catalyst for what's coming. The ancient writings speak of unexpected reversals, of the last becoming first. Antipater's son Herod would embody this prophetic theme in the most troubling way. Here was a descendant of Esau sitting on David's throne, ruling over Jacob's children. The irony cuts deep through history's fabric. The very people the Maccabees had forced to convert now held dominion over their descendants. The prophecies had warned of this reversal, yet few understood the signs until it was too late. Listen to the whispered warnings echoing through time. Herod's paranoia wasn't mere madness, it was the fruit of forced conversion, poisoning genuine relationship. He beautified the temple with unprecedented grandeur, seeking acceptance from those who would never truly accept him. The prophecies speak of worship offered with divided hearts, of magnificent buildings housing hollow devotion. Herod poured gold and marble into sacred spaces while his soul remained fractured between identities. The prophetic scrolls illuminate the deepest tragedy. Herod systematically destroyed the very Hasmonean line that had created him. He murdered his Hasmonean wife Mariamne, eliminated her sons, erased the bloodline that had forced his ancestors into Judaism. The ancient enmity between Jacob and Esau played out in palace corridors, in family chambers, in the very heart of Jewish power. Each execution was both personal vengeance and fulfillment of ancient prophecy about fraternal conflict. In the gentle glow of revelation, we see how every thread connects. The Maccabees' compromise with Torah law created a curse that would span generations. Their descendants paid the ultimate price for violating the principle of willing conversion. The prophecies warned that forced faith breeds forced destruction, that coerced compliance eventually turns to coercive violence. Herod's massacres weren't random acts of madness. They were the bitter harvest of seeds planted decades earlier in Idumean soil. The ancient texts whisper of signs and wonders when wise men arrived seeking the newborn King of the Jews. Herod's response revealed the full horror of his position. Here was an Edomite ruling Judea, terrified that a true Jewish king might claim his throne. The prophecies speak of this moment, the convergence of political fear and messianic hope. The star over Bethlehem wasn't just announcing salvation, it was illuminating the culmination of a curse begun with forced conversion. Listen to the prophetic irony whispered through the centuries. The Maccabees fought to preserve Jewish identity, yet their forced conversions ultimately put an Edomite on David's throne. They resisted foreign oppression, yet created domestic oppression. They defended religious freedom, yet destroyed it for others. The ancient scrolls speak of such reversals, of good intentions creating unintended consequences, of victories that plant the seeds of future defeats through compromised principles. In the soft candlelight of understanding, we see the terrible beauty of prophetic fulfillment. Every forced conversion in Idumea, every resentful compliance, every masked identity led inevitably to that night when Herod's soldiers would march toward Bethlehem. The prophecies had woven this tragedy across generations, connecting ancient brotherly rivalry to messianic near murder, showing how one compromise with divine law can echo through centuries, creating curses that demand the blood of innocents. The ancient writings illuminate the deepest mystery. How could the God of Israel allow an Edomite to rule his chosen people? How could forced conversion lead to attempted Messiah murder? Yet the prophecies whisper of divine purposes hidden in human failures, of redemption emerging from the darkest chapters. Even Herod's paranoid violence couldn't thwart the divine plan. The child escaped to Egypt, the prophecy of calling God's son out of Egypt, fulfilled through Edomite persecution. Listen closely to the whispered revelation. The Maccabees' decision to force conversion created an unbreakable chain of consequences. Their political pragmatism violated spiritual principle, opening a door that could never be fully closed. The prophecies warned of such moments, when expedient choices create generational curses, when winning battles leads to losing wars. The forced converts became a cancer within the Jewish body politic, festering until it nearly destroyed the very Messiah it was meant to protect. In the gentle glow of prophetic understanding, we see how one compromise can curse a nation. The Hasmoneans thought they were strengthening Judaism by forcing conversion. Instead, they were planting the seeds of their own destruction. The ancient scrolls speak of such ironies, of good intentions paving roads to tragedy. Yet even in this darkness, the prophecies whisper of hope, of divine mercy working through human failure, of salvation emerging from the very heart of curse. As the candles flicker and the scrolls grow dim, we understand the profound lesson whispered through the centuries. Authentic faith cannot be forced. Genuine conversion cannot be coerced. The Maccabees learned this too late. Their descendants paid the price. Yet the prophecies remind us that even the darkest human failures serve divine purposes, that curses can become blessings, that near murder can lead to ultimate salvation. Sleep now, knowing that grace triumphs even over generational consequence. Chapter 13, Cursed Generations. Sometimes a single decision, one moment of compromise, echoes through centuries like ripples in a dark pond. Tonight, we explore how one breach of sacred law, one violation of divine command, created a curse that would haunt generations, a curse that would ultimately lead to the attempted murder of the promised Messiah himself. The consequences of our choices, they stretch far beyond what we can see. Picture ancient scrolls unrolling in flickering lamplight, genealogies stretching back through time, each name carrying the weight of decisions made long ago. The rabbis understood something profound about generational consequences. They knew that when we violate the sacred boundaries, when we compromise with divine law, we don't just affect ourselves. We set in motion forces that will shape our children, our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren for centuries to come. John Hyrcanus stood at a crossroads, a moment that would define not just his reign, but the destiny of his people. The Torah was clear. Conversion to Judaism must be voluntary, from the heart, never forced upon the unwilling. Yet political power whispered seductive promises. Military victory seemed to demand compromise. The temptation to break divine law for seemingly righteous purposes proved too strong to resist. One decision, one violation, one curse began. The forced conversion of the Idumeans, descendants of Esau, violated everything the Torah taught about genuine faith. These weren't willing converts seeking the God of Israel. They were conquered people, threatened with exile, coerced into circumcision and Jewish law. Their resentment festered like an infected wound. They were inside the camp, but never of it. The ancient enmity between Jacob and Esau now poisoned the very heart of Jewish identity. Imagine the bitter irony. The descendants of Esau forced to worship the God of Jacob, their hearts burning with resentment. These Idumean converts carried within them not faith, but fury, not devotion, but determination for revenge. They learned Jewish law not from love, but from compulsion. They practiced Jewish customs not from conviction, but from conquest. The seeds of future destruction were planted in this moment of forced compliance. Generation passed to generation, and the curse deepened. The forced converts, the unwilling Idumeans, began to rise in power. Antipater, the Idumean, understood something the Hasmoneans had forgotten. He knew how to use his forced convert status, how to manipulate Jewish guilt, how to position himself as both insider and outsider. The very people who had been coerced into Judaism now maneuvered to control it. Picture the genealogical scrolls tracing bloodlines from Esau through Edom to Idumea, then to Antipater, then to his son Herod. Each generation carrying forward the resentment, the forced compliance, the bitter memory of coercion. The curse wasn't just spiritual, it was deeply personal. It flowed through bloodlines, through family memories, through generational trauma that refused to heal. Ancient hatred wrapped in religious law. Herod the Great, son of a forced convert, grandson of resentment, great-grandson of coercion, now sat on David's throne. The ultimate irony, the descendant of Esau, ruling over the children of Jacob. His Idumean blood carried centuries of bitterness. His forced Jewish identity masked deeper loyalties. He beautified the temple with one hand while plotting murder with the other. The curse had reached its terrible climax. The paranoia that consumed Herod, it wasn't just political, it was generational. He carried within him the fear of the forced convert, the anxiety of the outsider, the rage of the conquered. When he murdered the Hasmonean family, including his own wife, he was acting out generations of suppressed fury. The curse of forced conversion had created a monster wearing a crown, ruling God's chosen people. Then came the ultimate test, the birth of the promised Messiah, the child who would fulfill ancient prophecies, the heir to David's throne. But Herod, descendant of Esau, forced convert, cursed inheritor, saw only threat. The very bloodline he represented, the very curse his ancestors had endured, now drove him to attempt the unthinkable, to murder the Messiah, to kill God's own Son, to complete the ancient enmity. Bethlehem at night, peaceful shepherds, sleeping infants, and then the soldiers came. Herod's command echoed through the darkness, kill every boy under 2 years old. The curse that began with John Hyrcanus, the violation of Torah law, the forced conversions, had led to this moment, the attempted murder of Jesus Christ, the near destruction of salvation itself, all because one man compromised with divine law generations before. The domino effect of sin, it's like watching stones fall in slow motion across centuries. One compromise leads to another. One violation enables the next. One generation's choices become the next generation's curses. What John Hyrcanus thought would strengthen Judaism actually poisoned it. What seemed like political wisdom became generational catastrophe. The path to destruction, paved with seemingly righteous intentions. Picture those ancient genealogical scrolls again, but now see them differently. Not just names and dates, but choices and consequences. Each generation carrying forward the weight of previous decisions. Each bloodline bearing the fruit of ancestral compromises. And the forced converts of one generation becoming the tyrants of the next. The victims becoming the victimizers. The oppressed becoming the oppressors. The curse perpetuating itself through time. This is why the Torah was so specific, why divine law seems so rigid, why God's commands brook no compromise. Not because God is harsh, but because God sees the future. He sees how one small violation, one seemingly insignificant compromise, can cascade through generations. How what we think will help can actually curse our children's children. How the best intentions can pave roads to unimaginable darkness. The tragedy of unintended consequences, it whispers through Jewish history like a haunting melody. Each compromise creating harmony that becomes discord, each violation sowing seeds that grow into thorns, each generation paying for the previous generation's choices. The forced conversions that were meant to strengthen Israel nearly led to the murder of Israel's Messiah. The curse that began in political calculation ended in spiritual catastrophe. As we drift toward sleep, let this bitter lesson settle gently in our hearts. Our choices matter, not just for us, but for generations yet unborn. When we compromise with divine law, when we violate sacred boundaries, we don't just affect ourselves, we set curses in motion that our great-grandchildren may inherit. The echo of our decisions, it reverberates through time, shaping destinies we'll never see. Chapter 14, Cycles of Sleepy History. As we drift deeper into this ancient tale, we begin to see the great wheel of time turning slowly, methodically, each generation inheriting the choices of those before them. The Maccabees could never have imagined, as they forced circumcision upon the Idumeans, that they were setting in motion a chain of events spanning centuries. History whispers its secrets through bloodlines, through grudges, through the endless repetition of human folly and divine providence intertwining. Time moves in spirals rather than straight lines, each turn revealing familiar patterns dressed in new clothing. The resentment that festered in Idumean hearts after their forced conversion, this ancient wound, would fester for generations, passing from father to son like a family heirloom of bitterness. What begins as religious zealotry in one century becomes political ambition in the next, becomes paranoid tyranny in another, the same human impulses dressed in different robes, playing out across the stage of history. Consider how the biblical prophecy of Jacob and Esau, spoken over newborn twins thousands of years before, echoed through the corridors of time until it reached the throne room of Herod. The younger shall rule over the elder. Yet here was Esau's descendant wearing David's crown, a cosmic joke, a theological puzzle. The very people who had received the promise of eternal kingship, now ruled by those they had once conquered and converted. History delights in such ironies, such beautiful, terrible symmetries. The wheel turns, and those who think themselves masters of fate discover they are merely players in a drama written long before their birth. John Hyrcanus believed he was expanding his kingdom, strengthening his people, but every forced conversion planted seeds of future rebellion. Every compromised principle opened doorways to unforeseen consequences. The Hasmonean dynasty, so proud, so victorious, would watch their bloodline extinguished by the very people they had forcibly embraced. Time has such a sense of justice, such patience in its reckoning. In the gentle cycles of sleep and waking, we mirror these greater cycles of history. Each night we surrender to dreams. Each morning we wake to consequences of yesterday's choices. The forced converts of Idumea, sleeping and waking for decades with hearts full of resentment, their children growing up knowing they belonged neither here nor there, neither fully Edomite nor truly Jewish, caught between worlds, between identities, between the faith of their fathers and the law of their conquerors. This liminal space, this eternal between, breeds extraordinary people. Antipater the Idumean understood cycles, understood how power ebbs and flows like tides. He watched the Hasmonean brothers tear each other apart in civil war and positioned himself as the steady hand, the reliable advisor, the one who could navigate between Roman interests and Jewish traditions. His mixed heritage, once a source of shame, became his greatest asset. He could speak both languages, literal and cultural, standing at the intersection where forced conversion met political opportunity, where ancient grudges met modern ambitions. And so the son of forced converts raised his own son to be king of the Jews, Herod the Great, whose very title contains multitudes of irony, great in ambition, great in paranoia, great in architectural achievement, great in bloody cruelty. He rebuilt the temple more magnificently than Solomon ever imagined, yet was hated by the very priests who served there. He married into the Hasmonean royal family, then systematically destroyed them. Love and murder intertwined like DNA, like history itself, beauty and horror dancing together in the endless waltz of time. The cycles spiral inward, growing tighter, more intense. What began as military conquest becomes religious conversion, becomes cultural integration, becomes political ascension, becomes royal paranoia, becomes infanticide in Bethlehem. Each turn of the wheel raises the stakes. The forced conversion that seemed like merely another military victory now threatens the life of the promised Messiah himself. History holds its breath as the consequences of one compromised principle, one violation of Torah law, one moment of believing that ends justify means, reaches toward the Christ child's cradle. Yet even in this darkest turning of the wheel, we glimpse the greater pattern, the deeper cycle, divine providence working through human folly, God's purposes unfolding through broken vessels and compromised choices. The same Herod who massacres the innocents of Bethlehem also provides the magnificent temple where Jesus will someday teach. The descendant of forced converts unwittingly prepares the stage for the greatest conversion of all, not forced, but freely chosen, not at sword point, but at the foot of the cross, where every heart can find its true home. Time moves in great circles, and we who live within these circles rarely see their full circumference. The Maccabees could not see Herod. Herod could not see Christ. We cannot see what our own choices will birth in centuries to come. But in this gentle darkness, in this peaceful surrender to sleep, we can rest in the knowledge that even our failures, even our compromises, even our most misguided attempts at righteousness are caught up in purposes larger than ourselves, woven into tapestries we cannot yet perceive. The night sky that watched over Bethlehem, watched over Jerusalem, watched over the forced conversion ceremonies in Idumea. This same sky watches over us now as we drift toward dreams. The stars that guided the wise men also witnessed Herod's paranoid calculations, witnessed the flight to Egypt, witnessed the return to Nazareth. Celestial bodies continue their ancient orbits, indifferent to human drama, yet somehow blessing it, marking time, marking seasons, marking the eternal return of light, conquering darkness, hope conquering fear, love conquering hate. In the rhythm of our breathing, in, out, we participate in the great rhythm of existence itself. Empires rise and fall with the regularity of heartbeats. Dynasties bloom and wither like flowers in an eternal garden. The Hasmonean kingdom lasted barely a century, but its consequences echoed for millennia. Our own small lives, our daily choices, Our bedtime prayers ripple forward into futures we cannot imagine. Every kindness plants seeds. Every compromise births consequences. Every forced action contains within it the seeds of its own undoing. As sleep approaches, as consciousness begins its gentle retreat, we can release our grip on the illusion of control. The Idumeans could not choose their forced conversion, but their descendants could choose what to do with the hand they had been dealt. Some chose resentment, some chose ambition, some chose service, some chose love. In every generation, in every cycle, in every turning of the great wheel, individuals face the same eternal choice. Will we be agents of healing or agents of wounding? Will we break the cycles of vengeance or perpetuate them? The theological irony that runs through this entire tale whispers a deeper truth about grace working through the least likely vessels, about God's purposes accomplished through human weakness rather than human strength. The forced converts, the compromised dynasty, the paranoid king, the threatened infant, all become part of a story that transforms not just individual lives, but the entire trajectory of human history. Sometimes our greatest failures become the raw material for the greatest triumphs, not our own, but grace's working through us despite ourselves. In this quiet moment, as ancient history settles into modern dreams, we can find peace in knowing that every cycle, every generation, every turning of time's great wheel brings us closer to resolution. The curse that began with forced conversion ends with freely chosen transformation. The enmity between Jacob and Esau dissolves in the greater reconciliation that Christ makes possible. The paranoia that demanded infant blood surrenders to the love that offers adult forgiveness. Cycles of vengeance become cycles of grace. Spirals of wounding become spirals of healing. And so we rest, knowing that our own small part in history's great turning is held secure, not by our perfect choices, but by perfect love working through imperfect people. The same providence that protected the Christ child from Herod's sword protects us in our vulnerability, guides us in our confusion, redeems us in our failure. Tomorrow's choices await, but tonight we can sleep in the peace that passes understanding, trusting that every cycle brings us closer, closer to home, closer to healing, closer to the eternal rest, where all stories find their completion. Chapter 15, Dawns and Dusk. As our journey through this ancient tale draws to its gentle close, we find ourselves standing at the crossroads of past and present. The shadows of history that once seemed so distant now feel remarkably close, touching our hearts with their profound lessons. The Maccabees, John Hyrcanus, the forced conversions, Herod's rise, all part of an intricate tapestry woven across centuries, connecting threads of consequence that still whisper to us today. In the soft glow of evening light, we can almost see the ancient stones of Jerusalem, weathered by time, but still standing as silent witnesses to these remarkable events. The Temple Mount, where Herod once built his magnificent structure, now holds different sacred spaces, yet the echoes of that complicated legacy remain, carried on desert winds, speaking of choices made, paths taken, and the unexpected ways history unfolds when we compromise our deepest principles. The Idumean hills still roll beneath starlit skies, much as they did when Antipater walked these lands, caught between his forced conversion and his burning ambition. These same constellations witnessed John Hyrcanus making his fateful decision to force an entire people into submission, never imagining that this choice would eventually place an Edomite descendant on David's throne, The irony still hangs heavy in the desert air, a lesson written in stone and sand. Tonight, as we rest in the comfort of our beds, we can appreciate the profound complexity of human nature, how the Maccabees, those brave heroes who died for religious freedom, could later become the very oppressors they once fought against, their descendants forcing others to abandon their ancestral ways, creating resentment that would fester for generations. It's a reminder that even the most righteous causes can be corrupted when power enters the equation, when fear overrides compassion. The genealogical scrolls that once traced pure bloodlines from Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob became tangled with the names of Esau's descendants, Antipater, Herod, names that would make devout Jews shudder. Yet these same scrolls remind us that God's plans often work through the most unlikely vessels, that even forced converts and their children play crucial roles in the divine narrative, their presence weaving unexpected threads through the tapestry of salvation history, beautiful in its mysterious complexity. In Bethlehem tonight, children sleep peacefully in their beds, unaware that their little town once trembled under Herod's murderous decree. The same streets where Mary and Joseph sought shelter now rest in gentle quietude. The threat that once loomed over innocent lives has long since passed, yet the story remains etched in memory and sacred text, reminding us that even the darkest chapters can't extinguish hope, that light always finds a way to pierce through shadow. The ancient enmity between Jacob and Esau, once played out in personal rivalry, grew into something much larger across the centuries, their descendants continuing this struggle through forced conversions, political maneuvering, and acts of violence. Yet tonight, in the peaceful darkness, we can see beyond the ancient hatred, recognizing that every family feud, every generational conflict, eventually finds its way to redemption when we choose forgiveness over vengeance, love over fear. The temple that Herod built, with all its golden splendor and architectural magnificence, couldn't buy him the love of his subjects, couldn't erase his Idumean heritage, or silence the whispers about his legitimacy. Tonight, we understand that no amount of external beauty can compensate for inner corruption, that true authority comes not from force or wealth, but from genuine service, from earning trust rather than demanding submission, from building bridges instead of walls. As the night deepens around us, we can imagine John Hyrcanus in his final moments, perhaps wondering if his harsh decree was worth the temporary security it provided. Did he foresee that forcing the Idumeans to convert would ultimately threaten the Messiah himself? Did he understand that compromising Torah principles, even for seemingly righteous reasons, would create ripples across generations? Tonight we learn from his example, choosing gentle persuasion over forceful conversion, love over coercion. The Hasmonean dynasty, once the pride of Jewish independence, met its tragic end through the very people they had forced into their religious community. Herod systematically eliminated them, including his own beloved wife, driven by paranoia and the insecurity of his dubious legitimacy. Their blood cries out from ancient stones, reminding us that violence breeds violence, that oppression eventually turns on itself, that only genuine acceptance and mutual respect can build lasting peace between peoples. Tonight, as we drift towards sleep, we can feel the weight of these ancient lessons settling gently on our hearts. The story of forced conversion, political ambition, and unintended consequences speaks across millennia, reminding us to examine our own choices, our own temptations to use force instead of patience, power instead of persuasion. we learn that the most heroic acts sometimes plant seeds of future tragedy unless tempered with wisdom and humility. The curse that seemed to follow the Hasmonean line from their greatest triumph to their ultimate destruction wasn't really supernatural, but the natural consequence of abandoning their founding principles. When liberators become oppressors, when the oppressed become the 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 oppressed, the cycle continues until someone chooses to break it. Tonight, we rest knowing that we too have this power to choose mercy over judgment, inclusion over exclusion, building tomorrow's peace through today's kindness. In the gentle darkness, we can almost hear the whispered prayers of forced converts throughout history. Those who submitted outwardly while their hearts remained unchanged. The Idumeans who accepted circumcision but never forgot their Edomite heritage, their resentment passed down through generations, eventually finding expression in Herod's cruelty. Tonight we honor their pain, understanding that authentic faith can never be imposed, only freely chosen, only lovingly shared, only patiently cultivated over time. As our eyelids grow heavy, we marvel at the intricate connections between past and present, how the Maccabees' oil that burned for 8 days, symbolic of divine provision, contrasts with their descendants' harsh policies, symbolic of human failing. Yet both are part of the same story, light and shadow intertwined, reminding us that even flawed people can serve divine purposes, that even mistakes can be woven into God's larger plan if we remain humble and teachable. The stars that shine above us tonight, the same stars that witnessed the Maccabean revolt, John Hyrcanus' conquests, Herod's reign, and that holy night in Bethlehem when love finally conquered fear. They've seen it all, the rise and fall of dynasties, the consequences of choices, the redemption of mistakes. Tonight they shine peacefully, reminding us that every ending is also a beginning. Every dusk prepares the way for dawn. Every difficult chapter leads toward hope. And so, dear friends, as this ancient tale draws to its close, let its lessons cradle you into peaceful sleep. Remember the heroes and their flaws, the villains and their pain, the complex web of choices that shaped history. Let it remind you that your own choices matter, that kindness ripples forward, that love ultimately triumphs. Sleep well, knowing that tomorrow's dawn brings new opportunities to write better chapters, to choose mercy, to build bridges. Good night.